Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Sunday night edition of Trusty's Vintage Deep Dive. Tonight, we've got a deep dive with Sam from Dining at Sea. Now, it's never a prerequisite, and in this particular case, we have an example of Dining at Sea, and Sam do not have a YouTube channel, so do not go hunting for him on YouTube, but he has an absolutely fantastic Instagram channel, so that's where Dining at Sea comes from, and it's all one word, right, Sam?
Yep.
So Dining at Sea is on Instagram, and he is tonight sharing his, well, I'm going to say travel menu, but one of the things we're going to talk about is what's the best term to be using for that. So thanks for everyone joining in this evening. I know there is quite a bit of activity on YouTube right now, so appreciate those of you who have are giving me your time, giving us your time, and going to hang out and maybe ask some questions and check out some of Sam's fantastic collection of travel menus. So before I ask for that better definition, why don't you go and introduce yourself a little bit, Sam?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sam, again, Dining at Sea. I'm excited to kind of show off some really cool menus. I've been collecting menus for about 2.5 years. It was sort of one of those things that, like, I've always loved things that move. So like planes, trains, automobiles, ships. And so especially like the 1920s, 1930s, Art Deco style era. It just was like a very interesting topic for me. And then I also really like eating and food. And so like this seemed like a very cool crossover of, the art, the food, and then sort of the history and the information behind all of these ships. And then during, right before COVID, I was sort of like, well, I have this collection. It'd be kind of cool to share it with everyone. I have a scanner, I have a collection of menus. Like it would be nice to just put this up and see what happens. I don't expect to quit my day job doing it, but it's a fun hobby to have.
And got me addicted. That was where I found your channel, and I started my own collection totally because I didn't know these things existed. So very cool that you do that. And I can't believe you've only been doing it for 2.5 years. You have an amazing collection, so you've curated it very well in a very short period of time. And I will say thank you on everyone's behalf that you are doing that and scanning those and putting them up to share on your Instagram. So say a couple of quick hellos for some of the people who have joined in. We've got Katie, who is one of our standards from the deep dives. She was my very first deep dive on vintage typewriter ribbon tins. So always great when Katie can join in for one of the deep dives. Brian and Debbie coming in from the Chicagoland area. Got Delbert coming in, Proud American, coming in from Ohio. And let's see. And then we've got Scott coming in from New Jersey. I almost said Jersey, but he doesn't like when people say that. So we got Scott coming in technically from Philadelphia, but he is a Jersey guy himself. But I don't want to spend a lot of time on the hellos because I want to make sure we get into the topic of the deep dive. And the very first question, so you said you built up this collection in only 2.5 years, which already, again, makes me sad that I can't do the same thing. But what do you consider your collection? Are they travel menus? Are they ocean? Because yours is all ocean going menus, correct?
Yep. I consider it ocean liner collection. I do have a couple other menus that have sort of made it into my collection. I have like a Pan Am Clipper bar menu. I think I have an Amtrak menu somewhere in my collection, but I would say 99.5% of my menus are just strictly ocean liner or ship, I would say. Not all of them are liners. Some of them are what I would consider cargo liners, which is sort of like a cargo ship that happens to have a couple rooms on it. And then, it's another way for this company to make money. I find those really interesting. But I would say mostly all ship menus.
So even the ones that only had the little extra rooms, they would still print up menus for the handful of guests they had. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Now, how did you focus on, like you said, you had Pan Am and Amtrak kind of snuck into your collection, but how did you choose that ocean liners would be the ones that you would build the collection around?
Yeah, like I said, I really have always really liked ships, and to me, they're more plentiful. They're easier to find. I find the designs on them, it's just so varied and so interesting that I never get bored looking for them. There are so many companies, there are so many different ships. My collection spans 120, well, My earliest menu is from 1901. I don't have any later than I think 1980 something. So it's about an 80-year collection. And there's just so many different designs, especially you can sort of see trends. There's like the Art Deco, there's definitely like the 70s, like, bright colors, block printing, like kind of stuff. And so it's just like, there's just so much to collect.
And what would you say the era is that you like to collect the best, or like you collect?
Yeah, I really like to collect anything before the 1958 is the year in my mind, and 1958 specifically because that's the year that airline travel overtook ship travel on the Atlantic. So I really like to focus my collection pre-19, let's say 60.
All right, that's a fascinating little tip. I didn't know that. So in 1958, there were more people traveling via airline, or just more flights?
More people. That was the year more people took a plane to Europe than they did a ship.
Wow. Okay, very cool.
And I have an example of a cargo liner menu. This is from the President Johnson. This is from 1952. And you can tell that it's from a smaller cargo liner because it's typewritten rather than printed, like on a press. And it lists all 3 meals for the day. So that's sort of something that they would do to save costs.
And so, and that you said that was a cargo menu compared to what era would you say that one was from?
That was from 1952.
Okay. Did cargo travel, I'm assuming that continued past 1958 though, that was still, okay.
You can actually still book a room on like a modern day cargo liner or cargo ship. That's, a bucket list item. It's always been kind of at the back of my mind that would be really cool to do. Rather than like a Carnival cruise. No offense to Carnival, but.
Well, that's interesting too. You said you basically stopped collecting at the 80s, or is there a reason you stopped at the 80s?
Not really. I just like the older style. Most things after that period are done on like very glossy paper. These to me are, I don't know, prettier. There's less. I mean, they're commercial, of course, but they seem less commercial. They seem less slick, and maybe they were, during their time, they were very commercialized and very, top of the line. But to me, these have a little bit more grit and history to them, and that's sort of, why I've stayed away from newer menus. I also think, as like someone who likes reading about food, I also find the food in them kind of interesting. Like, you wouldn't believe the number of them that have aspics, which to me is vile. But it's just like more interesting food. Like, there's just food I don't see every day or hear about every day. And I think that's kind of interesting too, to see these different foods that people were eating in the 20s, the 50s, whatever.
Now you mentioned that the 1952 one from the cargo ship, you kind of highlighted that one had all 3 meals on one card. What is the norm for a menu from around that same era? Do you have something from the 50s of like, what would be the typical?
Yeah, so like here's another one. This is from P&O Line. So this would have been probably like a UK to Australia or UK to Asia ship. So this is just it's card style, one menu, or one meal, I should say. And it's, I would say this is a little fancier. It's, printed rather than typewritten.
Is any of it embossed, or is it just printed?
It's just printed.
Okay.
And it has like a fun design. It has like a song around it. It has like the lyrics to the song, on the back. So I would say that this is, a little bit fancier. So this is from the Strathnaber, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, from the P&O Line. This is from December of 1950.
And what did you call that format again?
I would say that this is card style. So there are a couple different styles, I'd say. You've got card, you've got booklet, which would open like a book. I've got a trifold that I'll show. And then I have a bunch of not a bunch. I have some die cut ones that are in like different novelty shapes. And then I have one that's the most novel of them all, which when we get there, we can talk about that one.
Something to look forward to. What would you say is, as you've been looking for them, what is the most common style? The booklet style, the trifold, or the card?
I would say booklet mostly, and then probably card, and then probably die cut ones. Die cut, are pretty rare, I'd say. I would say, those were pretty much designed for special occasions, like maybe the last meal, maybe a specific fancy meal. If there was like a special event on board, those were, not your everyday style menus where like this would be like an everyday style menu.
And speaking of everyday, like so you mentioned the cargo one had 3 meals for the day.
Yep.
And then the card one that you just showed was just 1 meal of the day.
Yep.
I'm assuming would there be a different menu then? There's a different menu for every day, correct?
Yeah, and it's interesting and I didn't pull them out because there's like 12 of them, but I have a collection from one particular Cunard cruise or trip from New York to Southampton. And so I had every luncheon and dinner from that trip, which is, I think, like I said, 12 meals. And some of the foods are the same. There's like definitely standbys. But some of the options change every day. So it's very interesting to see like what were they provisioning at the start and how were they using those foods, sort of across the Atlantic as they were traveling.
Did you purchase those as a set or did you build that over time?
I purchased that as a set.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Have you ever come across, as you're collecting your individual menus, have you ever come across 2 menus from the same voyage?
I have, and I didn't pull those out either, but I have some just happenstance that they came from the same voyage. I think I want to say it's American President Lines. All their ships had President something. So one of the presidents, it's like 1930s, I think, like going from the United States to Japan. I can't exactly remember.
So one of the questions that's coming in from Katie is related to kind of what we were just talking about. So if you've got, a 7-day voyage and it leaves on Sunday, comes back on a Saturday, would they have the same menu across like 2 weeks in a row? And would they be reusing the same menu? Or are the menus dated, or is there some sort of reference that would make a menu unique to a specific voyage?
Yeah, a lot of menus I would say are dated. Most menus, and one of the things that I will say is I try not to collect menus that don't have the ship's name on them. I find the ship one of the most interesting aspects of this. So if it doesn't have the ship name on it, I generally won't collect it. Most, if not all, menus have a date. So it would be hard to reuse it. I mean, like they could just sort of say like, yeah, whatever we had yesterday, we're having again today. But a lot of them do have specific dates on them. And I would say actually almost all of them in my collection have a very specific date. It's also interesting to collect and get menus from the same day, same year, but 2 totally different liners in 2 totally different places. That's happened a couple of times. And sort of see like, oh, this is the Queen Mary crossing the Atlantic, and this is the President Cleveland crossing the Pacific, and here's what they were both eating on November 9th, 1964 or whatever.
Now, speaking of having it with dates, I will say my collection pales in comparison to what Sam has. But I'm kind of looking at I have about a dozen menus. Right now, 4 of them are ocean liners. Then I have some airlines and also some trains. 3 of mine actually do have dates on them, but I do have one that is not. So I want to show it really quick because I want you to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
So in this particular case, so this one is listed as a menu for the new flagship MV Chinook. This one appears to be, I guess, I don't know if this would be qualified as a ferry because it's overnight every night from Seattle to Victoria. So I don't know how long of a trip that typically takes. This one, what I happen to have, gives the daily breakfast menu.
Yep.
So with something like this, would this be more along the line of what Katie was saying? Like this probably would not change. Or I'm curious when you talked about, because I've never considered it, is the idea of the provisioning of the ship.
Mm-hmm.
When does the menu get created? After the provisions are booked, or do they create the menu and then that's what they order?
So my understanding of this is it's based on provisioning. And so I've never actually confirmed this, so I've done a little bit of research into this, but my understanding is that all these ships had some sort of printing press on them, especially or typewriting, because especially if you look at something like this, clearly this was made up en route. And so my understanding is that they would look and see what they had and sort of meal plan out from there. One of the things to consider also is that like people would probably get bored of eating the same thing every day, especially if they had just paid in a large sum of money to travel this way. So I think of it as another like marketing experience as well, is that like, they were enticing people to like come on a Cunard liner or like a American US lines kind of ship. And so like having different unique foods or like different amenities, I think that was really a selling point for a lot of these.
Now, related to that, you mentioned, you used the term like, you could be spending a lot of money to do one of these cruises. I mean, we're all going to have different thoughts that come up when you talk about cruise travel, but Titanic happens to be one of the first ones. So you end up having, I'm assuming you have something like the first class, you'd have second class, third out of steerage. I can't imagine first class is eating the same food as steerage. So would there be a menu for something down at the lower levels, or is this something limited only to that top tier, passenger?
Yeah, so they would have menus. So the ship behind me is the Europa. And so I actually don't have a Europa menu, but I have her sister ship, the Bremen, which is this little guy from 1929. And so this is from Taurus third cabin. Sorry, I'm trying to, Taurus third cabin was what they would have rebranded third class or steerage as after 1924, which is when the United States changed a lot of their immigration laws. And so that, that moment, 1924, was when a lot of companies were like, oh, we used to make a ton of our money off of steerage class, people coming over from Europe to make a new life in the United States. And now how are we going to entice people to like, fill those berths again? And so they made it as like a cheap way to travel to and from, Europe to the United States. And so they would still get a menu card. This is the breakfast menu from that day. It's not very exciting. They talk about like, you're going to have bran flakes, shredded wheat, or oatmeal gruel as some of your options. They weren't really like rolling out the red carpet for this particular group of passengers.
Now, one of the questions that came in, and it may or may not be related, but came in from TFA and in Canada, talking about what happens to the leftovers. So from a very philosophical way, I mean, you are plotting, your menu based on what gets on the ship to begin with. Would those leftovers from first class make their way down to steerage and third class, or whatever the new term was? Or was that just not something that was taken into consideration?
That's a really good question. I'm not 100% sure of. Honestly, my thought is that probably a lot of food waste went overboard. But I don't have the answer to that, unfortunately.
And then the other potential answer, which you may not know, but area for where the leftovers go, did they ever do something special or print any sort of menu for the crew? So that I would assume at some point the crew was dining, at a certain time or at a certain location. Were they just grabbing whatever didn't get served in the other menu in the other dining rooms, or was there ever a plan for the crew?
That's also a good question. My assumption is that they were cooked for as well. They probably did not get a menu. I haven't come across any crew menus on some of the cargo liner menus I have. They do say like you'll be eating with the crew because it's only, I think the rule was you could have passengers on cargo ships as long as you had fewer than 12 passengers, because anything over that requires a doctor on board, which is why you always see doctors on board ships. Another fun fact for you. So, they were so few people that it just made sense to seat everyone at one meal. And that was crew and passengers.
Interesting. Now, Brian's coming in with a question that we'll talk, where hopefully we'll be talking a little bit more about also values, but because you're saying in some cases, or at least in some cases, they had printing facilities on board. As you're looking at collecting these, is there any sort of movement in value of whether you're finding things? I would assume there would be typos, so you're on a ship and somebody may just not know how to spell, hors d'oeuvre. So do you find that there's a collectible category for that changes the value? Would that go up, go down, or does it not really have a big difference? Or have you found any interesting errors?
I have purchased menus that have errors in them. I don't think I pulled any out to look at. Again, sometimes it's transposition, sometimes it's like close enough that you can recognize what it is. To me, it doesn't really affect the value. For me, value is really driven by particular ship, or particular company. Particular dates are also of interest. You'll see like, here's this is a menu from Christmas Day, 1928. And I thought that had like a nice sort of British winter scene on it. This is from a Cunard liner, the Orania from Christmas 1928. And I also like that sometimes people will like write little notes on the bottom as like a way of remembering. And this one says, "Not bad, but nothing like Christmas dinner at home in Victoria." So I thought that was kind of funny. But that has a nice design. Again, so to me, like those are the big, the couple big things are like, does the ship have history? Does the company have history? Or does it have like a very interesting date? There are a couple that I've picked up because of, the interesting history. I will say that like I have 2 menus in my collection from what I would consider very famous ocean liner disasters. One of the ones is from the Andrea Doria, which people might know of as the ship that was struck by the Stockholm in the Atlantic, sort of near, I want to say Cape Cod, in summer of 1956. It's famous because it took, it was one of the first disasters that occurred because of like misreading radar, which I think is very interesting. Only 40 people died between the 2 ships, which I think is a miracle of like modern technology. And this menu is from the Andrea Doria's maiden year, not the maiden voyage, but 1953, I believe, was her maiden year of sailing. This is to me, this is a very interesting menu to collect. This has history, ship history. This has company history with the Italian line, and it's talking about something that a disaster that happened with this ship. I paid $9 for this. I was just looking at comps today to get ready for this. So something similar to this would sell. I saw comps on eBay for about $70. I would not spend $70 on a menu. I've gotten close. The most I've ever spent.
Does the comp for that, because this would be something as a reseller, like it always pays to do your research, but you knew that was the first year that the ship sailed. Is that something that's not something most people would know? Is there more value because it was the first year, or is the value simply because it was Andrea Doria, so that anything for the Andrea Doria should sell for an increased premium?
I think it's a little for people who are collecting ocean liner memorabilia. I think first year has in value. I think most collectors would be collecting this for the fact that it's the Andrea Doria.
Okay.
The comp also I saw was not from 1953. I think it was from 1954. I think. So it, similar, not the year of the disaster, not like the voyage, but something before the voyage. The other one that I have that I think is interesting is a Cunard one. I think it has a really cool, like sort of Art Deco-y design, and it's from the Lancastria. And for those who have World War II knowledge tucked up there, the Lancastria is one of the worst losses of life on a ship during World War II. I believe something like 4,000 plus people were killed when this was struck by a U-boat torpedo. So to me, that's an interesting fact about this and why I picked it up.
Now, is that a war year menu, or is that from earlier?
This is from 1927.
Okay. So it had been around for a while.
Yeah. So this was, pre becoming a cruiser for the Royal Navy.
Okay, because Cheryl is asking a question, which I think is relevant to what you're just saying, was there less travel during World War II? Because, there would be question about would you really want to be traveling in an ocean liner at that time? Do you find menus that are dated in like 1941 and 1945? Are there as many of those available? And if so, like what happens to those values?
Yeah, I don't know if I pulled up. Let's see if I pulled up information on this one. I might have just grabbed it because of this exact question. Yes, menus from like 1939 to 1945 are, I think, really hard to find. You can find them. I have them in my collection, but it's World War II. And to your point, like a lot of companies that had their ships requisitioned, so people couldn't travel, and a lot of people didn't want to travel for, very obvious reasons. This one is from the President Harrison from the American President Lines. It's dated June 13th, 1941. So this is something that, would have been, the United States hadn't entered World War II yet. The American President Line was a Pacific Ocean-based liner. So they were actually, sailing from San Francisco, Honolulu to Japan mostly. So it's really interesting to see this one. And that's why I picked this one up, because specifically it falls in that date range of World War II, which is really, I think, hard to find.
So the question then, it's kind of spinning off of that, and there's a bunch of questions coming in. I will try and make sure all of them get popped up. But you mentioned, I said 41 to 45 because I was thinking of American companies. You've shown some that are non-American companies, and you referenced 1939. Is there any sort of window, or let's leave the World War II aspect of it. Collecting here in the United States, what do you find more readily available, and what do you find having better values or is more expensive?
In terms of just general collecting?
Yeah.
I would say, the big ones, people have heard of the United States lines, people have heard of Cunard. I see those a lot. And I think some of them are worth collecting. I think they're, definitely very interesting ships for both of those companies. Because they're so large, I'm sort of, I'll collect them. Like I have a couple from the United States. I definitely have Queen Mary, Queen Elizabeth. They're not my favorite to collect because I'm really looking for more interesting pieces to have in my collection that require a little bit more research on my part, because I like learning. And so when I find a menu from a ship that I don't know much about, to me that sparks a lot of like value in that, because it's sort of like, wow, someone took this little ship that no one has ever heard of, and they took it home, and it sat in their grandmother's basement in Kansas for 50 years. And that to me says this had real meaning to someone. And they kept it in this condition for so long. And to me, that drives up a lot of the value too. It's sort of this like, what is the history behind this? Why did someone keep this? Perfect.
Related to that, in the sense of the appearance of it, Nate from New Zealand has brought in a question and is wondering, and this kind of ties back to an earlier question about the printing, are the menus going to be collected maybe specifically because of the art? And in the case of the art, is it being done by famous people? And in the printing side, is this something where they would just print a stack of 5,000 blanks that would have the art already on it, and then all they're doing is in-house, they're just printing the text?
Yeah.
How is the art going to impact the values?
I haven't really found a ton of menus that have like famous artists as commissioned to do them. So that I don't know too much about. I do know that they were printing like stacks and stacks and stacks of these. One of the ones that you have with the captain's hat on it, I have a couple of those too. And I can just imagine that those being printed in reams of, this, and then just being shuffled out to all of the ships in their fleet and saying like, hey, use this whenever you get a chance.
And so that was actually, relevant, because when I showed this in my promotional video, one of the first things that Sam picked up on was that he recognized it and said, okay, which ship? And I didn't realize that the outside had absolutely no reference to what ship this was. I had to open it up, and then it gave the line, and then mine happens to be the SS President Cleveland from 1962. So yeah, so they, the whole company must have just printed, because it sounds like this was used on multiple ships,
totally,
as opposed to multiple voyages.
Yep, definitely.
A couple of questions are coming in about some specific ones that you may or may not know anything about, but I know you're also on the East Coast. So there was an East Coast question about the Morro Castle.
Yep.
I'm not familiar with that.
Don't have anything from that. I did see one recently of what it was. I believe it was called something else before it was bought by that line. And I think there was a menu, but I can't remember. I don't have anything from that in my collection.
Okay, and then another question that's coming in that makes it more of a geographic is like, again, most of what we're talking about are transatlantic or trans-Pacific. I had the weird, Seattle one. But do you have anything that were there menu cards like that or menus for Great Lakes travel? Because you wouldn't be dealing with nearly the distances.
Totally. Yes, I don't have any from the Great Lakes. I do have one from a Canadian company. I want to say Canadian Steamship Lines. That was sort of like the one you had with the Chinook. That's sort of a ferry between two, sort of different places along the St. Lawrence Seaway. And that one is interesting. Getting to your point, I think to Katie's question about date, is that they only had, from my research, only had 7 menus for dinner. They had their Monday menu, their Tuesday menu, their Wednesday menu, and they would recycle them. So the 2 that I have are 2 Monday menus from this company. Different years, but both Monday somehow.
Interesting. So one of the things at this point, I know you've shown some of your collection. I want to make sure we get into it. One of the things is, one question's coming in from Cheryl, another one came in from Katie, and they're somewhat related, is basically, do you hunt for menus when you're traveling? I know you do travel, in a non-COVID time, you do travel. Where are you looking for them? And then Katie was asking specifically, you mentioned a little bit on pricing, but what's the most you would typically pay for something that would just kind of be a run of the mill as opposed to something that was super special?
Totally. Yes, if there's an antique store or like a thrift store, I will definitely jump in there and ask if they have like a dealer who deals in ephemera. I will paw through ephemera for hours. I have no shame in doing that.
And how lucky are you in doing that? I've never found one in an antique store. All of mine came from online.
It's hard. A lot of them, because ephemera is so, it degrades. It's hard. I haven't been super lucky. I would say that there have been a couple stores that I know near me that deal in them. And so I'll find some good ones that I want to take home sometimes. In terms of price, the most I've ever paid for a menu is $62, and I'll show it in a second. The least I've ever paid for a menu, I want to say, is like 51 cents. And my average price is about $3, and that includes shipping. I'm super cheap. I don't love to spend a ton of money. If it's worth it, I will. But most of the time, I'm looking for stuff that, again, is not necessarily in the mainstream. And so to me, to that point, the prices are a little bit cheaper. So the one that I did spend the most money on is Novelty. And that's sort of why I spent a ton of money on it, is this printed fan. It's an Independence Day 1936 from the Taiyomaro from the NYK line, which is a Japanese line. So it's like, a novelty decorative printed fan. And I just thought the design was cool. I thought it was really cool that it was printed on a fan. And this ship has some particularly interesting history. This ship was one of the last ships to repatriate Americans from Japan at the outset of our involvement in World War II. And there were actually a few Japanese spies on that ship. And when the ship sailed into Pearl Harbor in Honolulu, they did recon work, basically, and then went back to Japan and sort of provided their findings, those findings sort of helped them plan the Pearl Harbor attacks. So I think, to me, that justifies the price on this. It has interesting history. It's novelty. It's, pre-World War II. And so that, to me, is a very interesting venue to have.
Did that have a box?
It did. It came in a little box.
Because Katie also had the question is, how were these menus, like, were they designed for the passengers to take the menus off the ship? So that one had a little carrying box?
Yeah, I think this was definitely like a take this home with you. I think a lot of times, I think they would have been thrown out at the end of the night because they were dated or they probably got dirty. So I think people grabbed them as like cheap, free mementos. I see a lot of them that have food stains on them. You can tell that something was spilled on them. So I think it was a cheap memento. I think something, and to that point, one of the things that a lot of these menus also do is, we'll see postcard menus. So I have a postcard menu here in the shape of a triangle. You can tell it's a postcard because it has a stamp on it, an address. And so, this is just like an interesting way. I sort of see this as like the 1920s version of like a humble brag. It's like, hey, look, I'm having such a great time. This is what I ate for dinner. Wish you were here. And so I think, postcard menus are really cool. And this again is a novelty shape. It's a fold out in a triangle. So I liked that one.
There's like 8 different questions that popped out of the last 3 minutes of what you just said. So I'm going to try and figure out how to tie them all in. So first, you were mentioning about the food and what condition they were in.
Yep.
And one of the ones that I have, this happens to be my favorite one, but it also is the one that's in the worst condition. So this one I think was something that somebody stole, or took from the ship, and because they wanted to make it easier to carry, they actually folded it in half. It also happens to have some food stains on it. Mm-hmm. So the question ends up being, in your experience, for something like this or any of the ones that you've collected, first of all, I'm just going to say I evidently have been rooked because I paid way more than $3 for like virtually every single one I have. But for something like this, how much will be, given the fact that these were not designed to be, pristinely kept, how much does condition affect, like I say, a condition of being folded in half? Yeah. How much does that affect the value versus a pristine one?
I would say really hurts the value. Things like excessive folding, excessive food stains, foxing, any sort of like molding damage, sun damage, those I would say really hurt the value. Again, if it's a ship that's got a lot of history or, a line that's got a lot of history, even with damage, people will try to sell them for higher prices. But I would say, excessive damage will really hurt the value. And I generally try not to buy things with excessive damage. That's like one of my no-nos when it comes to like what I collect.
I liked the bird. So then a related question, the fan you had was from the 4th, you said it was from Independence Day.
Yep.
So we'll skip over the fact that it's a Japanese line celebrating Independence Day. But so then the question is, from cross collectability and values, if these are being given specific dates, like a Christmas Eve menu or a New Year's Eve menu, or even like say something like a captain's dinner, how do those increase the value? I would assume like a Christmas menu, you might, particularly if it's decorated that way, you'd want it, the Christmas people would want it. But how do you see it Christmas Day versus February 2nd? Like, how do you see the difference of value?
I would say that particular dates like holidays, I see them having, increased value. I think people like particular dates. So like Christmas, I think, is a big one. I think Easter is another big one. I have a couple from Easter. Thanksgiving is a really good one. I have yet to find a Thanksgiving one. I think actually I might have one in my collection I did not pull out. But big holidays, I think people really gravitate towards those. And I think those can also drive the prices up a little bit. And then you get to your point, like, a random day in February is sort of like, maybe it has a cool design, but.
Okay. Another question that circles back. Vinny had asked this, and I have no interest in specifically handing out where you live, so you're more welcome to do so. But we mentioned that you're on the East Coast. And so the question is, because you are closer to the coast, or do you find them, I maybe wouldn't have a way of knowing this, but are they more plentiful along the coast where some of the cruise lines might have originated versus here in the heartland where, what's water?
It's so hard to say because I think a lot of these people took them as mementos because they, someone saved up, I feel like, for a really long time to take this trip. And so for me, the people who were living in the heartland, for example, and had never been to the ocean, here we're going to take a transatlantic cruise. I feel like we're more likely to keep things than people who maybe traveled more often, lived near where they, the ships embarked from. I do actually, I have to say, I get a lot of my menus from eBay, and a lot of them come from the Midwest, actually, anecdotally. I don't know if that's true for everyone, but.
I can't say I'd noticed where mine were coming from, but that actually makes a lot of sense, is that it would have more more sentimentality that you'd keep it.
Yeah.
But then when they become available, it's a one-off thing. Like, this is from our honeymoon cruise, or this is from, but it's, so it's like, once that's sold, there's not a whole plethora of them. Because like I said, looking at shops in the Midwest, I've never come across an antique shop that has, even with big ephemera collections, I've not found them with menus. Brian's coming in with a question about how you store them. And then I'm going to relate that to, or he has that both display and store them.
Yeah. I don't actually display a lot of them. I need to. I have a hard time, I think, choosing which ones to display. I have a pretty large collection, and it's sort of hard for me. I sort of get a little paralysis in choosing which ones I think are the best to present.
Katie can teach you how to do an ephemeral.
Yeah, exactly. And for the most part, I store them in like acid-free page protectors. Most of them are smaller than 8.5 by 11, so they fit into these, standard acid-free page protectors. And then I just have binders of them, and I have them sorted alphabetically by ship. That's how I know which binder to reference.
And if they're alphabetically by ship, do you have gaps in your collection that you're trying to fill in? Like, or do you have like placeholders? And which is more important for you? Are you going to try and build a ship that you don't have, or do you want to build across maybe multiple years or multiple ships that, or I guess multiple years if you're doing it by ship as opposed to by line?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an equal opportunity collector. Again, if it has sort of like, if it meets all of my factors, which is sort of like, how old is it? How rare do I think it is? How unique do I think it is? Is it artistic in its sort of display? And then sort of the X factor again, and cargo liners for me is one of the X factors. I really like cargo liners. I think they're a really cool way of traveling. And so like for me, if a menu meets some or all of those criteria, even if I have that ship already, I might buy it again. I might buy a similar menu. I generally try not to buy the same design of the same ship I already have. Like, for example, if I already had one of those captain hat menus from the American President lines, I might not go out of my way to buy another one. If it comes in a lot of other menus, sure, I'll pick it up. But once I have one design, I generally don't focus on that design again.
Now, you mentioned in your the factors, the SAM factors of what you're going to build to your collection, you mentioned rarity.
Mm-hmm.
Are there books that you're referencing? How would you know that something is quote unquote rare?
For me, rarity has a lot to do with like not the actual menu itself, but the ship. So, for example, the Normandy is a really good example of what I would consider rare ephemera. It started sailing, I want to say, in 1935, 1936, made it to 1939, started World War II, was requisitioned and kept in New York Harbor. And then it burnt to the ground, or burnt to the water, it wasn't on ground, in 1942. So it really only had 3 to 4 years of sailing. So to me, that speaks to rarity, because there's a very limited number of menus that may have survived those 4 years of voyages. So when I say rarity, I'm really talking about like the ship or the ship's history rather than the design. There are some that I think are like novelty, and I do want to show these before we run out of time. So I'm going to move on to some novelty designs really quick just so I can show them. We have this one, which is in the shape of a bell from the Hamburg America line. This is from May of 1935. And so you have the first page is the menu in German. Second page, since I apparently can't flip pages, is the same menu but in English. And then the third page is the music program for dinner that night. And so I thought that was like a really cool design. Like, this is again a die cut design. This is for the farewell dinner. Something like the last night on board. This would be like a special thing. This I would say would be like, ooh, I'm going to take this home. Whereas like a regular Tuesday night or whatever, maybe people aren't going to take that one home with them. Another one I have that's really interesting is, and so I want to say really quickly in terms of like comps and some pricing so people know. This I picked up for $27, and current comps are in the $20 to $45 range. This is the oldest of the ones that I saw. The comps were all from 1936 or 1937. So there's that. I have this, another die cut one. This is in the shape of a bunch of bananas, clearly. I thought it was funky, and I had to have it. It's for the tropical dinner aboard the SS Metapan, which is from the Great White Fleet. And this was from September of 1937. So this is getting closer to World War II. And I just like, I like the design. I thought that was really novel and fun, and why wouldn't I want to have a bunch of bananas in my collection? And then the last novel one that I pulled out, to me, is really hard to display without being able to see it standing up, because this would stand up. So this is the White Horse Tavern, or White Horse Inn, if you speak German. You can see it up here. And so this has like flaps on the side, and this would sit on, I'm assuming this would have sat at your table setting when you came in, and you would see this White Horse Inn menu with this little door that you could open. And it was aboard the SS Milwaukee, which is another Hamburg America line. Yes. And so again, you have your menu in English first. So that's what I find interesting, is on the way to Germany, the first menu listed was in German, then English, then music program. This one is on its way to the United States, so the first menu is in English. Then you have German underneath, and then you have the music program as well. And I just thought this was incredible. Like, how cool is this, right? It's freestanding. This would be a great one to display on a shelf, because you can just set it down and have it displayed.
That one is amazing. As Catherine still is pointing out, that it's so awesome. Now, you've already shown your most expensive one, so that's not your most expensive one. So about what did you pay for that?
I got this as a gift, so I did not pay anything for this one.
Technicality.
But I do know the person who got it for me, and I know that they would not have paid the comp that I found this morning, which was $199. I would not pay that for this. It's beautiful. It's really cool. To me, $200 is a lot of money. If this was a different ship from this company, the St. Louis is a really good example of a famous ship that was, again, World War II history. There were a bunch of Jewish refugees from Europe, and they were sort of not allowed to disembark in Cuba or the United States, and they were sent back to Europe. So the St. Louis, that has a lot more history from the same company. If I could find this design for that ship, I might pick that up for $200. Maybe. We'll see how flush I was feeling that day.
Now, one of the when we went into those, and those are fantastic. Did you have more specialty die cut ones you wanted to show?
Those are the only die cut ones I pulled out. I think those might be the only die cut ones I have. I do have another one of these from, I can't remember the name. Sorry. Also got that one as a gift. But I think those might be the only die cut ones I have currently.
Because you were talking about rarity when you showed those, and you were talking about the ship rarity. So one of the questions that came in, kind of somewhat related, but Katie is asking how you research the ship. So if there's not a book for the menus, is there books for the ships? Like, is that something you study in your spare time, or do you research it as you find the menu?
I have a pretty large collection, as you might be surprised, of history books about ships. So I do a lot of research that way. I have 2 books that I don't have. I just recently moved, so I'm still like moving stuff. I have 2 books that are called The Atlantic Liners and the Pacific Liners, very creatively. And they sort of detail ships from 1920 to 1970. So usually if I find a menu, I'll start there. They're really good reference points for ships. And then I'll sort of move on from there. As much as we've all been like sort of beaten into our heads that Wikipedia is bad, the source material on Wikipedia, awesome. Always go to the source material. There's a ton of source material on a lot of these ocean liners on Wikipedia. And that's sort of like a rabbit hole that I could fall down for hours at a time.
So and related to that rarity of the ship, you've talked about a lot of different lines, but the one I've not heard you talk about is the White Star line. So the number of Titanic menus out there are like ridiculously nil. Liverpool to Cherbourg are about the only menus that can exist. But Katie's asking about the Olympic, so the sister ship.
I don't have any from the Olympic. I do have one from. See, White Star is hard because White Star ceased to exist in about 1934. It was combined with Cunard. So it's hard to find menus before that. I do have two menus from the Megantic, which was a smaller White Star line cruise or ocean liner from 1930. And what's interesting is I have the same day. I think it's some day in June 1930, and one of them is printed in French and one of them is printed in English. Two different cards. But White Star is hard because of the sort of demise in the early 30s.
Interesting. So I guess that falls under the research. But you were also, in talking about rarity, the one thing you did not talk about was specifically the age.
Yep.
And earlier, I wrote down that you said your collection ranges from 1901
yes.
to 1980s. And I do not believe we have seen a 1901 example yet.
You haven't, and I will show it right now. This is from, and please pardon my German, not a German speaker, the Kaiser Wilhelm der Gross. This is from 1901. This would have been, I want to say, not first class. I want to say this is second class. It's also a postcard, should you want to send this to someone. It's from May 1901. And this is interesting. This is an interesting piece of history. This was the first four-funneled ocean liner when it was created or built in 1897. So to me, that really drives a lot of value. A, the age, B, the ship, and C, sort of the history of the ship. This is when you started, the Germans pulled these up, and all of a sudden people were like, if it doesn't have four funnels, I'm not traveling, not safe. Clearly the Titanic is the exception to the rule. But so this was very interesting to me, to find something like this. I paid $11 for this. And the comps I found are about 130. In this game, I will say there's a lot of dumb luck. There are people who don't know what they're selling, and I'm thankful for that, because I know what they're selling, and it makes it cheaper to buy things for me when they are just like, oh, this is a random menu in German. I have no idea what any of this is. So $11. See you later.
And I think you're going to have many people that are watching this. They're going to go try and start their own collection. So you're going to have more competition. But the question my question ends up being, is from that idea of both collectability and then related to the value.
Yeah.
Let's say maybe answer this from your personal experience / your personal collection. What is going to be a more desirable item? A 1901 menu from a ship that you don't know in a language that you don't understand, versus a 1958 menu that's maybe brilliantly, great art, some interesting food stuff, and it's all in English you could read. What's going to have more desirability and or collectability to affect the price?
I think it really, it depends on what people know. So that's why I think a lot of like the United States lines and the Cunard liners, I think they have higher prices because people know those companies. So they think like, oh, this is great. this is a Queen Elizabeth menu. I know of that. The design on the front is cool. Like, I'm going to buy this. And for me, again, for personally, my collection, I try to build up smaller, lesser known things because that's what I find more interesting. So I would say general collectability and general price value, the better, more well-known the ship is, I think you're going to see higher prices as opposed to like things that might be older or less known or in a language that someone doesn't speak. Yeah.
I will say right before we started, Sam and I were reviewing some comps just of what other things we're going for. And in general, there are a lot of some very high selling menus in the $7,500 range. We're basically like in that tiki, Polynesian, Hawaiian cruises where I feel like those probably transcended the idea of, hey, it's a menu. It's like, hey, cool, it's a tiki, it's a totem, it's a parrot. And so I would assume that probably carries a lot of weight as opposed to, like, to me, I would gravitate toward that 1901 because it's more elegant, it's more subdued, the colors aren't as bright, but that's not going to look good above my bamboo tiki bar.
Right,
so,
exactly.
So one of the questions, and this probably has to go to a pre-COVID time, Tiafane from Canada is asking if if you've met or if there is such a thing as menu collectors. Are there conventions? Are there clubs? Are there groups that you're a member of that you help each other, or is it super competitive and you're all fighting tooth and nail to get the one that you want and you screw everybody else?
Yeah, it's so funny because I actually haven't met another collector in real life. I am planning to go meet another collector in a couple weeks who doesn't live too far from where I live. They're trying to sell a collection of about 300 menus. And I've purchased some menus from them on eBay before. And they said, hey, I just mailed this to you. And I realized you don't live that far away from me. Do you want to come see the collection in person? And I'm like, yeah, I'd love that. So I am going to go do that. I haven't, it's hard because to your point, and someone also referenced the Lusitania in the chat. I did see that. Some of these menus, and the Lusitania is a unicorn for me. I would love to get one. It's a very interesting ship. It has a very interesting history. The prices are just stupid sometimes to me. I was talking with Patrick and I saw one that went, and I shared with him that sold for $275. I'm like, hey, I want a menu. I want this menu. I don't want it that bad. Like it's not in the cards right now. It's not in the menu cards right now. So, the other sort of unicorn I would say for me is the Stockholm, which is the ship that rammed and sank the Andrea Doria. I think it would be interesting to have two of those in the collection as sort of like both sides of the equation. There's two last ones I want to show. I know we're getting close to the last 4 minutes, and I pulled them out because of the design on one and the inside on the other. So I pulled this one out. This one is from the President Coolidge, 1935. And I just thought that had the coolest Art Deco design. Just this red and gold. You've got the islands, you've got the tropical fish, you've got the ship and the sun. I just thought I couldn't not buy this. I just thought the design was too cool, not to take home. So I wanted to share that one. I thought that had a cool design. I thought people might like to see that one. This is another one of my favorites. This is from the French line. It's very unassuming from the front. It's like, oh, it's this black and white wood cutting that's, ships of the 17th century. Ugh, boring. It's handwritten inside in like this script. It's all in French. And I just thought, that was super cool. The ship also has a really cool history. The Winnipeg repatriated a lot of people from Spain. I think 2,200 people in one voyage after the Spanish Civil War. So I just thought this had a lot going for it. And I thought that was a really cool sort of interior. I have very few handwritten ones, especially in this very like old school cursive script. I thought those were really cool to share. Last one really quickly, and I know we're gonna have to wrap up. I thought this was cool. This is a little trifold that I pulled out. I thought it was cool, firstly, because it has like a constellation design. You've got I don't know my constellations, but you've got a thing and a guy and a thing with a tail. Very descriptive. But I thought this was cool because it was like a cookout on deck. It's under the stars. This ship of the President Polk was sailing through the Panama Canal Zone. And I just thought this was like a really cool design. It's trifold. It's got like a interesting menu. The President Polk was a one cabin cruiser, so there were only 96 first class passengers. So you can imagine that this was a pretty, as intimate as a 96 person dinner can be under the stars. I thought that was, a pretty cool menu to pick up. Very
cool. We are wrapping to the top of the hour. I apologize if I missed anybody's questions. I was trying to write them down, just sneak them in, but we did kind of, fill up the full hour, which I knew we would do. We always do. We fly through these, we cover so much, and I learned so much. And, now I'm motivated to totally ditch my airline and train collection of menus and just focus entirely on the ship. So I'll be fighting you on all the eBay auctions. I'll be trying to take you out. So, but you can still go for the $3.
Yes, I'll take the $3 ones.
But I want to thank everyone for joining. A super big thanks to Sam. Again, he is not on YouTube, but please follow him on Instagram at DiningAtSea. All one word, and with at spelled out as AT. And that is literally what started my collection. I found him probably during COVID, when all of us had nothing else to do except sit through and go and look at Instagram. And the stuff that he has been posting, he mentioned he's moved, he's had some other things going on, so it hasn't been as active, but there's dozens and dozens of posts of all eye candy, and you will want to start your own collection as well. So again, thank you so much, Sam, for joining us. Thank you all of you for joining in to the live chat. If you're catching this after the fact, I hope you still enjoyed everything that you saw. So subscribe to Sam's Instagram. If you're not subscribed to me, appreciate it. Appreciate you giving me your time. Appreciate you putting your trust in Trusty Huckster. Everybody have a great night. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.